Damalerio.
In 1986, a populist democratic movement in the Philippines swept corrupt dictator Ferdinand Marcos out of power and ushered in an era of freedom. But the country remains a fledgling democracy and one of the deadliest places in the world for journalists. Since 1986, 33 journalists have been killed and no arrests have been made. It was in this environment that 28-year-old entrepreneur and idealist Edgar Damalerio decided to shut down his profitable computer business and embark on a life as a journalist. In addition to doing radio and television commentary, Damalerio went to work for one of the many grassroots newspapers that had sprung up. His paper, the Zamboanga Scribe, operates out of a storefront with a staff of 8. For 3 years, Hernan de la Cruz published Damalerio's work in the Zamboanga Scribe.
There is one point which I love this profession because of its noble mission to be the watchdog of the government, to be the voice of the people. I believe that Edgar has a similar thinking and understanding as the way I have.
The Scribe is based in the port city of Pagadian on the island of Mindanao. A complex mix of urban and rural life and notorious for its lawlessness. Damalerio's reporting angered powerful people in the community. He accused the vice mayor of profiteering and purchasing overpriced transportation. He criticized Police Superintendent Hawani for his failure to curb illegal drugs, and the governor for trying to shut down a hospital expansion only because it was funded by a political rival. Most journalists in the Philippines steer clear of these stories, knowing all too well they could get killed. Melinda Quintos de Jesus championed Damalerio's case in the media.
He was seen as an outstanding young reporter. He had the kind of impact of somebody who was not afraid to call the shots.
In 1998, Damalerio married Gemma, and their son Edgar Joshua was born in 2001.
What attracted me to Edgar was his goodness, his capacity to understand, and his generosity in helping people in need.
April 19, 2002. Damalerio exposed a local electrical company that failed to account for $1 million allocated to projects never completed. He questioned whether this money had lined the pockets of corrupt politicians. In a recent column in the Scribe, he wrote a stinging expose of police racketeering. Publisher Hernan de la Cruz.
The last time that he talked to me was about on the allegations also that a top police official was protecting illegal drugs and illegal gambling, and behind the spate of killings and carnappings in the city.
Damalerio received death threats. Anonymous callers phoned the Scribe and his home, warning him they would get him. May 13, 2002, 7:30 p.m. Damalerio was driving home with his friends from a press conference.
Nagtawag siya sa kuha.
He called me because I sent him a message saying, "Watch out, because there are suspicious men outside our house." So he said, "Okay, just lock up. I'm on my way home now."
But his attackers had set a trap, and he soon became aware he was being followed as well. His friend and colleague Edgar Amoro was traveling with him.
So immediately we turned our eyes left side, the three of us, and there we saw that single motor with two persons riding on it.
Edgar Onge was also in the car.
Ako di ari ko.
Here's where Edgar Amoro sat. Then I was here. And here's where Edgar Damalerio was.
Marlon Toledo directed the inquiry for the National Bureau of Investigation.
This is where the incident happened. As the vehicle of Edgar Damalerio was passing by this area, the assailant came on board a motorcycle, and as he passed by just at the side of Damalerio, pulled out his gun.
This is where it hit, the first shot.
Hitting him at the left side of his armpit, hitting his heart and his lungs, causing his instantaneous death.
Being with Damalerio, who was hit, I was shocked and I couldn't move. I froze because I saw Damalerio was already shaking because he was hit. I was scared because the gunman came back and asked, "Who's this? Who's this?" while we were holding Edgar Damelerio's body. We didn't say anything because he was the one who shot at us.
Amoro sent a text message to Gemma to tell her Edgar had been shot.
After I received the message, I became somewhat unconscious. I didn't understand how or what I was feeling. But after a few minutes, when I came back to full consciousness, I realized that the very thing we feared had finally happened, that he was killed.
The witnesses positively identified the killer. He was not a gangster. He was a well-known local police officer, Guillermo Wapili. But capturing him was not simple.
Actually, before the warrant of arrest was given to Wapili, he was supposed to be confined to the provincial command. But when the arrest warrant was released by the court, it was sad to note that Wapili was nowhere to be found.
He had been in the custody of his own department, but mysteriously he managed to escape. Lynn Newman, who covers Asia for the CPJ, brought the case to a world audience.
Clearly this guy Wapili is being protected by some powerful people, and that is outrageous.
Superintendent Godofredo Mendoza de los Santos has been the provincial director of the Pagadian Police since February 2003.
I don't see anything difficult for journalists to be afraid in the city of Pagadian. The case of Wapili and Damalerio is just an isolated case, indeed.
But the facts tell a different story. 2 journalists have been killed in the past 2 years in Pagadian City alone.
This is chapter and verse of what's wrong with the justice system in the Philippines, and chapter and verse of why murders of people like Edgar frequently go unpunished.
But Gemma Damalerio, along with the 2 witnesses, turned up the pressure on corrupt police officials and her husband's murderer.
These are people who stand to get a bullet in the head for testifying in court, and yet now for many, many months they've been willing to come forward and put themselves on the line for this.
The case illustrated the possibility of actually getting somebody indicted in court because witnesses came forward and the killer was identified.
Now the witnesses and his colleague are in grave danger. De la Cruz carries a gun and is flanked by heavily armed bodyguards.
I still believe that having an escort and having guns is not a guarantee of your security.
Ready to fire.
And in fact, it has ethical question for journalists carrying guns.
Meanwhile, Gemma Damelerio's life is also in danger. She lives in hiding and returned to Pagadian only to champion her husband's cause.
Sukad sa pagkamatay ni Edgar.
Since Edgar's death, a lot has changed. The whole family is not here in Pagadian anymore. We had to move because of all the harassments and threats.
Both Amoro and Onge, the friends of Damalerio and witnesses to his murder, live in constant fear for their lives. Charged but never arrested, Wapili remains free and on the run. Despite all the fear and intimidation, the fight for justice for Damalerio is now a celebrated cause in the Philippines.
Ang iyang trabaho gyud.
His job was a really big risk for our whole family. I already talked to him about it early on because I, for one, was really scared. But he just responded, "I already offered my life to this country." Who else would start this, especially if we know of their unjust deeds? We really have to fight for what is right. I don't have any fear of dying anymore.